Hey, it's Ollie, and here I'm going to give you 6 very, very important tips for reading effectively in a foreign language. And this is important because most people reading completely the wrong way, and as a result they think that reading is too hard, it's too hard to learn anything from reading, and so they don't bother. They go back to whatever app they were messing around with on the train. So these 6 tips, you might be familiar with them if you have any of my books from the 101 Conversations series, short stories. I include a big kind of write-up on effective reading inside in the introduction to those books. So these might sound familiar if you're familiar with those. But these tips I'm going to give you here are designed for use with any material. So you don't have to use my books. You can use anything that ideally that you are interested in and want to read. Which brings us to tip number 1, which is the most important thing of all, because without this everything else fails, and that is to choose material that is at your level. The reason most people cannot successfully read in the language they're learning is because they choose stuff that's too hard. If you pick a novel that's intended for native speakers, just like if you try to watch a movie that's intended for native speakers, it's too hard, it's over your head, you spend so much time looking words up, you get frustrated. That is not a recipe for effective learning. This follows the idea of Stephen Krashen's comprehensible input, which is the idea that you learn or acquire language when you read messages that you can understand. And the key there is that you can understand. So you should be reading material where you can already understand a good amount of it, at least 70%, ideally a little bit more, so that you can actually get the gist of what you're reading without understanding every single word. So it should be relatively comfortable to follow the main message. Again, think about it. If you can't follow the main message, then you're not going to get much benefit from it. So that's number 1. Make sure you choose material that is at the right level for you. Step number 2 is to use contextual clues to help you before you start reading. Now, any language teachers in the audience will be very familiar with this. It's called a pre-reading activity in teaching parlance. But this is the idea that the story or whatever you're reading is not just the words on the page, it's other things as well. So if you take this book, for example, you've got a lot of information here just on the cover. Now in these books we have multiple different stories, but if this was just one book, then whatever's happening on the illustration and the front cover is going to give you a clue about who the characters are, what's happening. And you've also got illustrations, and the story has a title, the individual chapter has a title, and these things can give you information about, can help you guess what the contents of the story are going to be. And if you've got an idea in your mind about what you're about to read, it's going to actually be easier to then follow the meaning of the stuff that you actually read. Okay, just like if you pick up a newspaper and you read the front page, then the photo on the front page is going to tell you a lot about what it is that you're about to read in that main story, right? If you open the paper and just start reading from the first word, you're doing a lot of guesswork. So use contextual clues around you inside the book, illustrations, titles, chapter names, things like that, to help you predict what you're going to read, which is going to make everything a lot easier. Tip number 3, this is when you actually start reading. So you open up the book, you start reading the first word, and you carry on. Tip number 3 is to read right the way through to the end of what it is that you're reading. Now, obviously that doesn't mean read a whole book in one sitting, but read the first chapter in one sitting. You should be choosing stuff where that's possible. Okay, if the chapter that you're about to read is 50 pages long, it's not the best thing. Ideally, short chapters, and your aim should be to get from the beginning to the end of that chapter in one sitting. Don't stop to look up words. Just focus on the gist of what it is that you're reading. Now, the reason for this is because if you do anything else, if you stop to look up words, if you stop to study the grammar, then what you're doing is preventing yourself from actually reading large amounts. And the big benefit of reading is what is known as extensive reading, which is reading large amounts for fun. Ideally, what you want to be doing with reading is developing a habit of reading for pleasure, because if you're doing that every day, that's the kind of big picture idea of how you're going to learn lots of things. Okay, so when you first start reading through, don't stop to look anything up. Just focus on understanding and enjoying what it is that you're reading, and get right through to the end of that chapter before you do anything else. Step number 4. This is what happens when you have successfully read from the beginning to the end of the chapter without looking up any of those words, remember. And step number 4 is to pause and to summarize in your mind what it is that you've just read. Who are the characters? What did they do? What did they say? Where did it take place? Was there a cliffhanger? What is going to happen next? You don't have to spend a long time doing this, but the reason this is important is because when we read in another language, we don't bring our native level reading skills with us. We leave them at the front door. And what we tend to do is start to kind of read from the first word and then read the second word, the third word, the fourth word. We just read words at a time and we stop interpreting and following along the kind of bigger picture of what it is that we're reading. It's a habit everyone has, so don't worry if you do that. But that makes it all the more important when you get to the end of that chapter to stop and just gather your thoughts and think about what it is that you've read, so that you're training yourself to actually derive the enjoyment from what it is that you are reading. There's no point reading a story if you're so focused on the words that you don't know what the plot is. Okay, so take a second to pause and summarize in your mind what it is that you have read, because then you're going to move on to step number 5. And step number 5 is to go back and to read it again. Now, confident readers, when you can already understand a great deal of what you're reading, you don't need to do this. You can just carry on and just read the book just for pleasure, as you would with anything else. But if you're still at a point where you're trying to learn actively from your reading, then going back and reading that chapter again is going to be super helpful. Why? Because you're going to notice so much more the second time. You've read through once, you've got an idea of the gist, you've paused, you've taken a minute to take stock and figure out what you have, what happened during that chapter. So when you go back and read again, you're going to pick up a lot more stuff. And what this does is it gives you the chance to notice more things. And noticing things in what you're reading is one of the keys to learning languages. It's not studying from lists of words, it's reading real content and actually noticing the words that are used, noticing the grammar, noticing the things that people are saying, the way that word order works, all of these different elements of the language. You want to be able to notice as much as possible. And so repeat reading of chapters is one of the things that gives you the opportunity to notice new things. Now, if you are reading through a second time, then what you can do is to look up a few key words, because let's not be unrealistic about it. There are going to be some words that you don't know and that you probably need in order to understand the plot. The key thing is that you don't do that at the beginning on your first pass, but it's okay to start doing that on the second or the third pass. But the rule you should follow is a rule that my friend Alex Rawlings told me once, which I thought was just absolutely brilliant, which is only look up words which have occurred 5 times. And the reason that this rule is good is because it stops you looking up every word, which bogs you down. But also because you know that if a word has cropped up 5 times, it's likely to be important to the story, right? So it's a word that is worth looking up. So this is step number 5, is to go back, read again, and then look up certain words if you need them, but only the ones that keep coming up. What this does is it means that you can keep learning, getting some benefit from the reading, whilst also making it through the story, because the next thing you're going to do, step number 6, is then to keep reading. Move on to the next chapter. Move on. Don't stop and study the grammar and break it apart and memorize words. Don't do any of that. Keep reading, because the ultimate aim here, the ultimate prize, what we're trying to do is to develop a reading habit that is exactly the same as what you'd have in your mother tongue, because then you are an independent, autonomous learner and you can continue learning by yourself without the need for a teacher. And this is a whole ethos behind my story learning method. It's why we do what we do with our books, with our Uncovered courses. We're trying to create an independent learner out of you so that you can learn for fun, you can enjoy the process, and you can keep learning by yourself and be self-reliant in your learning. That's what's cool. I like being self-reliant. Anyway, those are the 6 steps to reading effectively in a foreign language. Number 1, choose material at the right level. Number 2, use contextual clues before you start reading. Number 3, read all the way through of one unit of text without stopping, without looking anything up. Number 4, summarize in your mind what you've read. Number 5, read it a second time, looking up keywords only. And then number 6, carry on and repeat the process for the next chapter. Hope that was useful. Any questions? Let me know in the comments. Like the video, subscribe to this channel if you want to hear more just like this, because there's a lot more coming. And don't forget, if you want some good books, my books of short stories are perfect for that. Put a link in the description. See you in the next video.